You can't change what you don't acknowledge. And I have sat across from thousands of families who are experts at hiding the very thing that is poisoning them. There is a specific dynamic I see time and time again that troubles me more than almost anything else in this line of work. It is the dynamic of the identified patient, or what folks at home might call the black sheep. The family brings me a sacrifice. They drag a young man or woman onto my stage, point a finger, and say, "Fix him, doctor. Phil. He is broken. He is the reason we are miserable. He is the chaos." And while that young man might indeed be yelling, throwing punches, or self-destructing, my experience tells me that behavior is a language. When I see a child acting out in a way that seems irrational, I don't just look at the child, I look at the system that produced him. I look at the water he's swimming in. Because you don't get a frantic, rage-filled reaction in a vacuum. I remember clearly when the file for the Sterling family landed on my desk. On the surface, it looked like a slam-dunk case of an ungrateful, out-of-control adult child terrorizing his saintly parents. The title on the producer's brief was simple: "My son is a monster." They sent in hours of video footage. I sat in my green room watching clip after clip of 24-year-old Jason. In the videos, he was a tornado. He was punching holes in the drywall, screaming profanities at the top of his lungs, and seemingly threatening his mother, Linda, over trivial things like laundry or money for gas. To the casual observer, Jason was a nightmare. He looked like a menace to society who needed to be locked up or kicked out. But I've been doing this a long time, and I watch the game film differently than most people. I watch the edges of the frame. In one video, Jason is screaming, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. But I listened to the voice behind the camera. It was Linda. Her voice wasn't fearful, it was steady, almost rhythmic. She was narrating the event while it happened, poking at him with verbal jabs that were quiet enough to barely register on the microphone, but sharp enough to cut deep. She wasn't retreating, she was advancing, camera in hand, cornering a wild animal, and then acting surprised when it bared its teeth. I paused the tape and looked at Jason's eyes. I didn't see a predator, I saw a cornered rat. I saw a young man who was completely dysregulated, drowning in a cocktail of shame and fury, reacting to a stimulus that the camera wasn't quite catching. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a simple intervention about anger management. This was going to be an autopsy of a toxic family system. When the day of the taping arrived, the tension backstage was palpable. My producers told me that Jason almost walked out 3 times before he even got to the makeup chair. He was convinced we were going to ambush him. He thought this was just another venue for his mother to publicly flog him, only this time on a national stage. And frankly, based on his life experience, he had every reason to believe that. Linda, on the other hand, was ready for her close-up. She was in wardrobe early, making sure her hair was perfect, rehearsing her tears. That's a red flag for me. When a mother is more concerned with how her grief looks than the fact that her family is imploding, my radar goes up. She wanted validation. She wanted the world to see her cross to bear. I walked onto the stage, the applause died down, and I took my seat. Linda and her husband, Robert, a man who seemed to have faded into the upholstery of life, sat on the couch to my right. Jason sat alone on the other side. The distance between them might as well have been the Grand Canyon. I started where I always do, by letting the story breathe. I asked Linda to explain why they were there. She didn't hesitate. She launched into a rehearsed monologue about her suffering. She listed Jason's crimes: the broken doors, the stolen cash, the disrespect, the refusal to get a job. She painted a picture of a parasitic monster who was draining their retirement and their will to live. I walk on eggshells in my own house, doctor. Phil, she said, dabbing at a dry eye, I'm a prisoner. He controls everything. The audience was swaying to her rhythm. They were nodding, making sympathetic noises. They looked at Jason with disdain. Jason, for his part, sat slouched, arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring at his boots. He was vibrating with tension. Every time Linda exaggerated a detail, like saying he destroyed the entire kitchen when the photos showed one broken plate, Jason's jaw would clench, but he remained silent. He had learned that speaking only made it worse. He had learned that his truth didn't matter because he didn't have the packaging to sell it. He was the bad kid. She was the devoted mother. The script was written long before they got to Hollywood. I turned to Jason. You're hearing your mother describe you as a terror, Jason. She says she's afraid for her life. How do you hear that? He looked up, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. She's lying, he muttered. She doesn't tell you what she does. She doesn't tell you how it starts. So tell me, I said, leaning in. This is your time. What does she do? She pushes, Jason said, his voice cracking. She picks at me from the minute I wake up. She tells me I'm worthless. She tells me I'm just like my uncle who died in jail. She hides my keys so I can't leave, then screams at me for being late to interviews. Then, when I finally snap, she pulls out the phone and hits record. You guys only see the explosion. You don't see the fuse. Linda immediately jumped in, her voice shrill. That is a lie. I have done everything for you. I bought you that car. I pay your insurance. I didn't ask for the car, Jason shouted, finally breaking. I asked you to stop going through my room. I asked you to stop calling my friends and telling them lies about me. See? Linda pointed a manicured finger at him, turning to the audience. See the aggression? This is what I deal with. He's ungrateful. I held up a hand to stop the shouting. Time out, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Linda, you're talking about gratitude and cars. He's talking about boundaries and privacy. Those are two very different conversations. And I got to tell you, looking at this footage, I'm confused about something. I signaled to the control room to pull up a specific clip I had marked earlier. It was a video from inside their kitchen. Jason is pacing, clearly agitated, asking his mother to please just leave him alone. Linda is sitting at the table, calm, sipping coffee. She says, quietly, almost with a smile, why would I leave you alone? You're a child. You can't handle yourself. You're pathetic, Jason. Everyone knows it. On the tape, Jason screams and kicks a trash can. I paused the video on Linda's face right before the kick. I looked at the giant screen, then turned to look at Linda. Linda, I'm looking at your face here. Your son is in distress. He is begging for space. And you are smiling. Help me understand that emotion. What is funny about a young man losing his grip on reality? The room went silent. The audience, who had been firmly on her side moments ago, shifted. They saw it now. That micro expression of duping delight, the satisfaction of pushing a button and watching the machine whir to life. I wasn't smiling, Linda stammered, her composure slipping for the first time. I was nervous. It's a nervous tick. I don't think so, I said, keeping my voice low and level. I think you know exactly where his buttons are because you installed them. We are going to get to the bottom of this, but we have to stop pretending that Jason is the only problem here. You can't tell me he's the only one dancing when you're the one playing the music. This was the pivot point. We had peeled back the first layer of the onion, and frankly, it stank. But to understand why a 24-year-old man stays in a house where he is tormented, and why a mother feels the need to dismantle her own son to feel powerful, we had to go back. We had to look at the history of this family, because toxic dances like this aren't learned overnight. They are practiced, rehearsed, and perfected over decades. You can't have a tyrant without a silent partner. And in the Sterling family, that partner was Robert. While the audience was fixated on the fireworks between Linda and Jason, I was watching the man sitting on the periphery. Robert was physically present, but psychologically absent. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, staring at a spot on the carpet, trying to make himself as small as possible. This is a survival mechanism I see all the time in volatile households. The father figures out that if he stays neutral, if he becomes part of the furniture, the predator won't turn on him. But what he doesn't realize or chooses to ignore is that his neutrality is a betrayal. Every time Jason was cornered and Robert said nothing, he was confirming Linda's narrative. He was telling his son, "You are on your own." I turned my chair toward Robert. "Robert, I want to talk to you," I said. He looked up, startled, like a deer caught in headlights. "You've been watching this dynamic for 24 years. You see your wife poking the bear, and you see your son exploding. What is your role in this?" Robert cleared his throat, looking nervously at Linda before speaking. I try to keep the peace, Dr. Phil. I just want everyone to get along." When Jason starts yelling, I tell him to calm down because he's upsetting his mother. "So when the house is on fire, you're yelling at the person coughing on the smoke?" I ask. "You're telling Jason to calm down, but do you ever tell Linda to stop lighting the matches?" Robert went silent. He couldn't answer because the answer was no. To challenge Linda was to invite her wrath. And Robert had decided long ago that sacrificing his son's mental health was a price he was willing to pay for a quiet evening. This is what we call triangulation. Linda uses Robert as a shield and a witness. She provokes Jason, Jason reacts, and then she turns to Robert and says, "See, look how crazy he is, do something." And Robert, driven by his own anxiety, turns on Jason. It's a 2-against-1 dynamic that drives people insane. We dug deeper into the history. This didn't start when Jason was 24. It started when he was 14. I had my team pull the school records and talk to extended family members during the investigation phase. Up until middle school, Jason was an honor roll student. He played baseball. He was happy. But then the natural process of individuation began. That's a fancy way of saying he started growing up and wanting his own identity. For a healthy parent, a child becoming independent is the goal. For a parent like Linda, who relies on her child for her own emotional regulation and sense of purpose, independence feels like abandonment. I'm looking at these report cards from 10th grade, I said, holding up a stack of papers. Jason's grades tanked. He quit the baseball team. Linda, you told the producers that he fell in with a bad crowd. But I talked to his coach. The coach said, "Jason, quit because you showed up to every practice and screamed at him from the bleachers, critiquing his stance, telling him he was embarrassing the family." The coach said Jason was humiliated. Is that true? "I was supporting him," Linda insisted, her face flushing pink. "He needed guidance. He was lazy. If I didn't push him, he wouldn't do anything. He's unmotivated, Dr. Phil." He has no drive. He has no drive because you hijacked the steering wheel. I shot back. You created a self-fulfilling prophecy. You told him he was incompetent, you micromanaged every move he made, and when he finally gave up and stopped trying because he couldn't please you, you pointed and said, "Look how lazy he is." This is the backstory of the failure to launch syndrome we see so often. It's not that the kid can't fly. It's that someone has been clipping his wings every night while he sleeps. We discovered that 2 years ago, Jason actually tried to move out. He had saved up money from a landscaping job, a job Linda hated because she thought it was beneath him, and put a deposit on a small studio apartment. I looked at Jason. Tell me about the apartment, son. Tell me why you aren't living there today. Jason's hands were shaking. This was a wound that hadn't healed. I was ready to go. I had the lease. 2 days before I was supposed to move, the money was gone from my account. It was a joint account I've had since I was 16. She emptied it. She took $3,000. The audience gasped. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the studio. I looked at Linda. Did you take his money? I was protecting him, Linda shouted, and for the first time she looked rattled. He wasn't ready. That apartment was in a terrible neighborhood. He would have been eaten alive. I put that money in a savings bond for his future. I didn't spend it. I saved him from making a mistake. You stole his exit strategy, I said, my voice dropping an octave. You didn't save him from a mistake. You saved yourself from an empty nest. You crippled him financially to keep him under your roof. And then, once he was broke and stuck, you started complaining that he's a leech who won't leave. Do you see the insanity in that logic? This was the escalation point. After the apartment incident, Jason gave up. He stopped working because he figured, why bother if she's just going to take it? He fell into a deep depression. He started sleeping until noon, not because he was lazy, but because he was avoiding her. He stayed up all night playing video games because that was the only time the house was quiet, the only time he felt safe from her commentary. And Linda used this withdrawal as ammunition. She started recording him. She started calling the police for wellness checks when he locked his door, telling the officers she was afraid he was suicidal or dangerous. You weaponized the police against your own son, I told her. I have the police reports here, 6 calls in the last year. No arrest, no charges, just officers showing up, finding a guy playing Xbox and telling you to stop wasting their time. But you didn't stop. Why? I'm afraid of him, she whispered, reverting to the victim role. You don't see his eyes, Dr. Phil. When he gets mad, he looks evil. I'm looking at his eyes right now, I said, and I don't see evil. I see rage. And let me tell you something about anger. Anger is just a symptom. It's what we call a secondary emotion. It's the smoke, not the fire. The fire is hurt. The fire is fear. The fire is frustration. This boy is enraged because he is screaming for help, and the person who is supposed to be his anchor is the one drowning him. I could see Jason's defenses starting to crack. He wasn't used to being understood. He was used to being the problem. To have someone in a position of authority look at the evidence and say, wait a minute, the math doesn't work here, was dismantling his armor piece by piece, but we weren't done. We had to confront the reality of their daily life right now. The escalation had reached a fever pitch the week before the show. There was an incident involving a door that was now off its hinges that Linda claimed was proof of Jason's violent nature. But like everything else in this house, the physical damage was just the final punctuation mark on a long, twisted sentence of psychological warfare. Let's talk about last Tuesday, I said, leaning forward, the day the door came down. Linda, you sent us photos of the splintered wood. You said Jason tried to break into your room to attack you. That is a serious accusation. If that is true, he belongs in jail, not on my stage. But I have a feeling there is a preamble to that event that you left out of your email. I turned to Jason, walk me through it, frame by frame. What happened 5 minutes before that door broke? Jason took a deep breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest. I was on a Zoom call, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I had a preliminary interview for a remote customer service job. I didn't tell her because every time I tell her I have an interview, something happens to the car or my suit goes missing. So I set it up in my room. I was 5 minutes into the call. The interviewer was asking me about my schedule. Suddenly, the Wi-Fi cut out. He paused, looking over at his mother, who was now staring straight ahead, her jaw set in a hard line. I thought it was a glitch, Jason continued. I went out to the hallway to check the router. It wasn't just unplugged. The cord was gone. She had taken the power cord, and she was standing in her bedroom doorway, holding it, smiling that same smile you saw on the video. And then what happened, I asked, keeping my eyes on him. She ran into her room and locked the door, Jason said. I knocked. I said, Mom, please, I'm in an interview. I need the cord. She didn't answer. She just laughed. I could hear her laughing through the door. I panicked. I knew I was losing the job. I started banging on the door. I yelled, give it back. And she yelled back, come in and get it if you're so tough. So I kicked it. The latch gave way. She was sitting on the bed, holding the cord and her phone, recording me. As soon as the door opened, she started screaming, he's killing me! Help! He's breaking in! I let that hang in the air for a moment. The studio was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. I turned slowly to Linda. Linda, I said, my voice low and dangerous, did you take the router cord while he was in a job interview? He was lying, she blurted out, her voice rising in pitch. He wasn't in an interview. He was probably playing games. I pay the internet bill. I have the right to turn it off whenever I want. It's my house. That's not the question, I said, cutting her off. The question is about intent. You knew he claimed to be doing something productive. Instead of verifying it or supporting it, you sabotaged it. You created a crisis. You baited him. You took away his ability to communicate with the outside world. You locked yourself in a room and you taunted him. And when he reacted exactly how any frustrated, desperate person would react, you hit record. I stood up and walked over to the monitor. This is what we call reactive abuse, I told the audience, pointing to the frozen image of Jason's angry face. This is when a person is pushed, poked, prodded, and gaslit until they snap. And the moment they snap, the instigator steps back, holds up their hands, and says, look how crazy he is. But Jason isn't crazy. Jason is reacting to a crazy situation. Linda, you wanted that door broken. You needed that door broken because a broken door proves you're a victim. A son with a job proves you're unnecessary. Linda gasped, clutching her chest. How dare you? I am a good mother. I have sacrificed my life for him. You haven't sacrificed your life, you've consumed his, I said. You are feeding off this. You are addicted to the chaos. If Jason gets a job, moves out, and becomes a happy, functional adult, what does that leave you with? It leaves you with a quiet house and a husband you don't talk to. It leaves you with no drama to tell your friends at church. You need him to be the monster so you can be the martyr. I turned my attention to Robert, who was looking more uncomfortable by the second. And you, I said, pointing a finger at him, you were home when this happened, weren't you? Robert nodded weakly. I was in the garage. You heard the yelling? I stated. You heard your son begging for the internet cord? You heard your wife laughing? You heard the door break. What did you do? I stayed out there, Robert admitted, looking down at his shoes. I didn't want to get in the middle of it. You are in the middle of it. I slammed my hand on the arm of my chair. Your silence is an endorsement. By staying in the garage, you told your son that his reality doesn't matter. You told him that his mother's cruelty is acceptable. You are the silent partner in this abuse. You are watching your son drown, and you're standing on the dock checking your watch. Robert flinched, tears welling in his eyes. I just don't know what to do, he whispered. If I say anything, she turns on me. So you throw your son to the wolves to save your own skin, I said. That is cowardice, Robert. Plain and simple. You are sacrificing your child to appease a bully, and make no mistake, Linda is a bully. Linda stood up, gathering her purse. I am leaving. I didn't come here to be insulted. I came here to get help for my son, and you are attacking me. Sit down, Linda, I said, my voice commanding. I didn't yell, but the authority in my tone stopped her in her tracks. You can leave if you want. You can walk out that door right now. But if you do, Jason stays here, and I will help him. I will get him the resources he needs to leave your house, and I will make sure he never has to look back. And you will go home to that empty house, and you will have nobody left to blame. Is that what you want? She hovered for a moment, weighing her options. She realized that if she left, she lost control of the narrative. She sat back down, crossing her arms tightly, her face a mask of indignation. Good, I said, sitting back down. Now we're getting somewhere. We have stripped away the lies. We have established that Jason is not a monster. He is a product of his environment. We have established that Linda is an instigator who sabotages her son's independence. And we have established that Robert is an enabler who allows it to happen. This is a sick system. It is a toxic triangle. And it ends today. I leaned in toward Jason. Jason, I want to talk to you about your role in this, because you're not an innocent bystander either. You are 24 years old. I know you've been beaten down. I know the deck is stacked against you, but you are playing the game too. Every time you scream, every time you kick a door, every time you take the bait, you are giving her exactly what she wants. You are handing her the ammunition to shoot you with. You have to stop reacting. You have to stop engaging. I don't know how, Jason said, wiping his eyes. It's like a reflex. She knows exactly what to say to make me crazy. I know she does, I said softly. She installed those buttons. She knows the codes, but we are going to change the codes. You have to learn that the most powerful thing you can do in that house is nothing. Silence is your shield. When she hides the keys, you don't scream, you call an Uber. When she turns off the internet, you don't kick the door. You go to a coffee shop. You have to become boring to her. If you don't give her the explosion, she loses her power. This was the confrontation phase, but not just with Linda. I had to confront Jason with his own agency. He had learned helplessness, a psychological state where an individual feels forced to endure aversive stimuli, painful or otherwise unpleasant, that he becomes unable or unwilling to avoid even when the opportunity is present. He believed he was trapped. My job was to show him the door was unlocked. He just had to stop banging on it and turn the handle. I'm going to offer you a lifeline, I told him, but it comes with conditions. You have to be willing to walk away from the chaos. You have to be willing to leave the known misery for the unknown possibility of a better life. Are you ready to do that? Yes, Jason said immediately, I'll do anything. And Linda, I turned back to her. We need to talk about what's driving this need for control, because happy people don't destroy their children. Secure people don't sabotage interviews. There is a hole inside you that you are trying to fill with your son's dependence. And until we fix that, you will never be happy no matter how much you control him. The audience was leaning forward. We had broken the family open. The raw nerves were exposed. Now came the hardest part, the pivot. Could they actually change, or was the pathology too deep? The breakthrough I was looking for wasn't just tears. Tears are cheap. I was looking for a shift in perspective. And I saw the first glimmer of it in Robert. Robert sat up straighter. He looked at his wife, then at his son. Dr. Phil, he said, his voice shaking but louder this time, you're right. I've been a coward. I watched her cut that cord. I saw it. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to fight. But looking at the video, looking at my boy, I can't do it anymore. Linda whipped her head around to look at him. Shock registered on her face. Robert, what are you saying? I'm saying, he's right, Linda, Robert said. And he reached out to touch Jason's shoulder. We broke him. We did this. This was the crack in the dam. When the enabler wakes up, the narcissist loses their footing. Linda was suddenly alone on her island of righteousness, and the water was rising. Robert's admission hit the room like a physical blow. Linda recoiled as if she had been slapped. Her eyes darted around the studio, searching for an ally, for someone to validate her narrative. But the audience was silent, their gaze heavy with judgment. For the first time, she was truly alone. The triangle had collapsed. The bad kid was being seen as a victim, the passive husband was speaking up, and the saintly mother was revealed as the architect of their misery. You're turning on me? Linda whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of betrayal and disbelief. After everything I've done for this family, I am the only one holding this house together. No, Linda, I interjected, my voice firm but not unkind. You're the one holding them hostage. There is a difference between holding a family together and suffocating it. You have equated love with control. You think if you aren't managing every aspect of Jason's life, you don't matter. But that isn't love. That is possession. I turned back to Jason. He was staring at his father, his expression a mix of shock and cautious hope. He had waited 24 years for someone to stand up for him, and it had finally happened. Jason, I said, leaning forward, your father just handed you a key. He validated your reality. He said, I saw it. Do you understand how powerful that is? Jason nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. I thought I was crazy, he choked out. I thought I was making it all up in my head. She always told me I was remembering it wrong. That is gaslighting, I said, and it is one of the most damaging forms of emotional abuse. It makes you question your own sanity, but you are not crazy. You are reacting to a crazy situation, and now we are going to change the situation. I looked at Linda. She was weeping now, but they were different tears. They weren't the performed tears of a martyr. They were the terrified tears of a woman who was losing control. I don't know how to stop, she sobbed. I worry about him all the time. I just want him to be okay. Then you have to let him go, I said gently. You have to let him fail. You have to let him succeed. You have to let him be Jason, not your project. And that starts today, right now. This was the confrontation phase shifting into the resolution phase. We had exposed the wound, cleaned it out, and now it was time to stitch it up. But the stitching required action, not just words. Here is the deal, I said, addressing the family as a whole. We cannot send you back to that house the way you came. That environment is toxic. It is radioactive. Jason, you cannot live there anymore. Not right now. You need space to heal, to rebuild your confidence, to figure out who you are without your mother's voice in your head. I turned to the screen. I have arranged for you to go to a dual diagnosis treatment center. Not because you are an addict or mentally ill in the traditional sense, but because you need to detox from this family system. You need therapy to deal with the trauma, the anger, and the learned helplessness. They will help you build life skills, get a job, and learn how to set boundaries. Are you willing to go? Yes. Jason said without hesitation, I'll go today. I just want out. Good, I said. And Linda, Robert, you have work to do too. This dynamic didn't happen in a vacuum. Linda, you need individual therapy to understand why you need to control everyone around you. You need to find out who you are when you aren't being a victim mother. And Robert, you need to learn how to find your voice. You need to learn how to be a husband and a father, not a doormat. I looked at Linda. Are you willing to do the work, Linda? Or are you going to go home and find someone else to blame? She hesitated, wiping her eyes. I will try. I don't want to lose my son. Then you have to change, I said. Because if you don't, you will lose him. He will walk out that door and never look back. And frankly, he should. The show ended with a plan in place. Jason left directly from the studio to the treatment center. Linda and Robert went back to their hotel with a list of therapists in their area and a strict set of rules. No contact with Jason for 30 days. No phone calls, no texts, no surprise visits. They had to give him room to breathe. 6 months later, I sat in my office reviewing the follow-up tape. The change was nothing short of miraculous. Jason looked like a different person. He had gained weight, his skin was clear, and he was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes. He was working at a landscaping company, had his own apartment with a roommate, and was even dating. In the video update, Jason sat on a park bench looking directly into the camera. Dr. Phil, he said, his voice steady and confident. I didn't think I could do it. I was so scared to leave, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I realized that I wasn't the problem, I was just the symptom. My mom and dad are still working on their stuff, but we talk once a week now. It's better. She still tries to give me advice, but now I know I don't have to take it. I just say, thanks, Mom, and change the subject. And my dad, he actually calls me just to say hi. That never used to happen. I smiled as I watched. This was the outcome we always hope for, but rarely get so cleanly. Jason had broken the cycle. He had stepped out of the role of the identified patient and become the author of his own life. But then the video cut to Linda and Robert. They were sitting on their living room couch, the same couch where so much misery had taken place. The house was quiet, too quiet. It's hard, Linda said to the camera, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked older, more tired. The manic energy was gone, replaced by a subdued sadness. I miss him. I worry about him every day. I still want to call him and tell him to wear a jacket or ask him if he's eating enough. But Robert stops me. He says, let him be, Linda. And I try. She looked at Robert and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Linda still had the urge to control. The instinct was deep-seated, but she was restraining it, and Robert was finally stepping up to enforce the boundary. We're learning, Robert said. It's quiet here, maybe a little too quiet, but at least there's no yelling. At least we know he's okay. I turned off the monitor. The silence in their house wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of peace, however fragile. They were learning to live without the chaos that had defined them for so long. They were learning to be a couple again, without a scapegoat to distract them from their own issues. This case stayed with me because it perfectly illustrated the concept that the problem child is often the healthiest person in a sick system. Jason's rebellion was a sign of life. He was fighting to survive. His anger was a rational response to an irrational situation. By removing him from the environment, we didn't just save him, we forced the system to confront itself. Without Jason to blame, Linda and Robert had to look at each other. They had to look in the mirror. And that is the hardest thing any of us ever have to do. We build these elaborate structures, these dramas and conflicts to avoid facing our own emptiness, our own failures. We point fingers, we scream, we create villains and victims, all to distract ourselves from the quiet truth that we are responsible for our own happiness. Jason is out there living his life. He isn't perfect. He will stumble. He will make mistakes, but they will be his mistakes. And that is the definition of freedom. He is no longer the vessel for his mother's anxiety or his father's cowardice. He is just Jason. And that is enough. As I packed up my briefcase that evening, I thought about the thousands of other Jasons out there trapped in houses where love feels like a cage. I thought about the mothers who can't let go and the fathers who won't speak up. It is a tragedy that plays out behind closed doors in every neighborhood in America. But every once in a while, the door opens, the light gets in, and someone finds the courage to walk out. That's why I do this. Not for the ratings, not for the applause. I do it for that moment when a young man realizes he isn't broken, he's just been carrying a load that wasn't his to carry. And when he finally sets it down, the sound of that burden hitting the floor is the sweetest sound in the world.